Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? Good? Excellent. Unfortunately, I wasn't here yesterday, but I've been speaking to some people who shared how they felt that yesterday was really good experience. So I'm hoping that I can follow in the footsteps of those who were here yesterday and kind of continue the conversation. So just to say a little bit about myself, so I'm Marsha John-Greenwood from TIFF. So hopefully some people know TIFF in the room. And if you don't, obviously Toronto International Film Festival is one of the top film festivals in the world. It's a public film festival, which we're really proud of. It gives an opportunity to the public to mingle with everyone across the world who descends onto Toronto on those first 2 weeks in September. But we're actually embarking on something new this year, where we're launching TIFF the Market. So this is an extension piece in terms of the industry. So this talk today is actually really important to us because we're quite a medium side, although we have big reach. So some of the things I'll be referring to is how we keep people at the center of technology, but how technology then enables us to do what we do every day. So most of the things you're going to hear today are not going to be rocket science, right? It's going to be stuff that we know, but I hope it resonates. And I'm very much a conversationalist, so for me, if you've got comments or points, please, let's engage. Let's have a conversation. I believe I'm in a room with friends in terms of we all kind of walk a similar path, depending on our roles. But the important thing is that we're going through a journey that most of us have not tread before, with the evolving of not just technology, but the way of work. So I kind of want to talk to both of those. So let's get into it. So for me, when we really think about technology, I kind of wanted to know the why, right? So why is technology kind of being the number one thing that we're all talking about? Me personally, people is why I'm in this business. This is what I do. I've been doing it some 20, 30 years. But the point is that the only reason I do it is because I really feel that my role is to enhance individuals' experience at work so that they can be the best they can be. So technology has always been an enabler to that. And more recently, we've seen the rise of how that almost is overtaking in sometimes what we do. And I kind of want to just reaffirm that it's not. It's still an enabler. Although I did have a conversation a couple of weeks ago at the Deloitte did their HR trends when they were saying that we had to review the way we worked and to think about managing agents as well as humans. That blew my mind. So that's quite scary that we're actually talking about structures where we're actually putting AI agents, those magic 2 letters, in that. But what I want to do today is kind of bring us back to why. Why is it important? How does it help us? How does it actually enable us to have, and the employees have the experience where they can bring their whole self to work, be authentic, and continue to be able to be productive? So that's where I want to kind of go. So for us, in terms of that, there was a couple of things that I wanted to kind of focus on. When I think about the employee experience, I actually think about the evolution of that and why we're at the stage we're at. I feel that maybe in the last 6 years, and again, be interested if people feel the same, we saw a shift. We saw the expectation of our employees shift. They shifted from really wanting to, be kind of directed in the work to kind of being able to work where they want to work, use technology to do the work. And so there's this burden on us as HR professionals to really lean into that and say, well, actually, how can that also help us? So we have an opportunity, whether we look back and think about using it for like answering quick questions, being able to demonstrate and get some of what I call the administration work. But really and truly, what we want to do is be able to continue to add value. But we want to make it easier for the employee also to engage with the organization. So, when you look at that, you also think, that's great, but then how does that work for us from an HR lens, but also how does it work for an employee? And so one of the things that's really been coming up and quite pertinent, and some of the work that I've done in the past, has been around how do we create technology that helps the employee, but also helps us? And it's not just in freeing our time, but also gives us information, gives us data points, enhances what we do so we can continue to add value. So we'll go into that a little bit more. So what's happening in this space? We're seeing that the employees actually want more from us, and I think that's the right way to be. They want more, and so we're saying, okay, if you want more from us, how do we create that space? How do we create that capacity? We've seen the change in the psychological contract with employees. They're no longer thinking, they almost want to be consumers at the workplace. I mean, yes, we pay them, but they also want us to be in a position where we're offering them something more. So this is where we can enable that through different things. And it's also made me think, I was thinking about some of the work I had done in terms of implementing some of this technology in the last 10 years. The focus really has been around shared service models, for those of you that are familiar with that. And thinking about, okay, how do we make it accessible? How does that information become accessible to the employee? And a lot of the work I did was around implementing systems, so whether it's Workday or other tools, but it was really about how do we implement those systems to enable the employee to self-serve. And so the focus was on that. And then we started to shift to this point where we had experts in whether it's Center of Excellence or others who had more information. So it's also this tiered model. So at the beginning of that kind of journey, which started for me maybe about 12 plus years ago, it was very important to start pushing information to employees to help themselves. But now what we're saying is not only are we pushing information to employees, we're actually expecting them to be able to access that information in different ways. And so the increase in push for us, because employees almost see themselves as consumers, is that they want to be able to get that information at their fingertips. So whether it's an app or online, and so there's more pressure for us to put more information in that way. So where does that kind of leave us as we do that? Well, we saw the kind of evolution of this opportunity to do more in-depth, not just value, but also being able to work closer with the business in terms of what they're trying to determine. But as we've done that, we've seen this almost like a squeeze, like a push, because now the employee is saying, well, I need more, and I need more, and I want more, and I want more of your time. So therefore, the challenge for us is how do we give the business what it needs, as well as being able to do our role as well. So then you start to see this kind of move, and there was kind of like I'll just move on to this, where you start to see the usage of us in particular looking at how data can tell a story. How can data tell us create the business case for things that we do? So now you've got information being pushed to employees because you want them to be able to access things. You've got the business who are actually wanting more from you. So what they're actually doing is saying, well, how can you tell, how does that tell us why you need to do that? How do you build a business case to improve if you say this is going to improve the experience for the employees? So then again, now the onus is on us to be able to pull that data, analyze that data, and inform the business to support that and become really a true business partner. And for those of you that have had maybe business partners roles, or your business leaders, or your HR leaders, I actually see us as business leaders with the people lens. And so that really is our opportunities to use technology to help that. And as we evolve, further, and we start to think about what else the information, how it correlates, how it can really, tell us and pull information from different systems, I see our role kind of becoming more and more looking at how we kind of drive the business to not just use technology, but also to create a culture where that's the norm. The thing, though, as we do that, you almost have to think about, what do we lose in that process? And so this is why I always have people at the center of anything that I'm thinking about. Because sometimes what happens is with the evolution of, in particular, the AI, AI agents now, etc., there's almost a fear out there. People start thinking about their jobs. They start thinking about how they, what they can do because they're skilled in this and they can see that technology is going to take that over. So now we have a third layer to our role. So we've got the employees that we're trying to make life easier for them. We've got the business where we're providing the information and using technology to do that. And then we've got this third bit, which is how do we support the business, employees, to still feel that they're in there and that, we're not going to be overtaken by technology. And so that then becomes a very, very more culture piece. And so when I look at anything, if I implement any system, if I think about new ways of working, I'm always looking at, how does that affect the culture? What are the things that we need to do? You almost can't just implement a system and just think, there you go, it's done. We all know the failure and success rates of projects if you don't, do the nuts and bolts, which is communication, the training, and look at what sustainment is. But here's this other thing here, which is culture, which we know is nebulous by nature. But actually, we still need to think about that. And so one of the things, and I'll pose this to yourselves to think about, is as we start to look at how we can leverage technology, what else we need to do to support the business? Because we can't just think about this is going to make our lives easier. We have to think now, how does this operate in the business? Because guess what? It's not just us that's implementing tools to help us. There's other parts of the business doing the same. And so one of the things I've been really looking into and really reading about is understanding what happens when we implement something here and the impact it has on these pieces. And I'll give you a little story. This is really going to age me, but I'm going to share it anyway. So, oops, nearly went through. It's all right wearing heels until you go in the crack. But maybe many moons ago, I worked in a bank, and I worked in the Barclays Bank in the UK. You can hear I'm originally from England. But at the time, they were rolling out laptops. That's how old I am. I know, I just aged myself. But the point was, I was actually doing my postgrad at the time. And so I was, following this, and I used it. I said, you know what, I'm going to use this as my business case, the introduction of digital technology, whatever. But what the key thing was is when they rolled this out, they were rolling it out to relationship managers in corporate banking. They say, yeah, we want you to go on the road. You need some equipment. Here's your laptop. Here you go. And they thought it was going to work. It didn't work. The reason it didn't work is that they gave someone some tools, but they didn't look at the ecosystem. They didn't look at what's going to happen to those people back at the office who've always had their manager next to them, and there started to be a disconnect. And that was my first real light bulb moment as an HR professional. I was a trainer at the time, thinking, wow, we can't just do something here and not fill in all the dots over here or think about the impact it's going to have. So I say that to challenge us, right? To think that, yes, we're going to support the business. Yes, we're going to continue to implement tools. But we also have to think about how do we support the business shift so they start to think about the other things. And so that starts to talk about the nature of work. And those of you in the room have been to, like me, over the last few months, many conferences, trends, reports. Everybody's talking about the future of work. Well, the future's here. We're in the future, right? This is it. It's going to evolve, and we know that, but it's been evolving, a day and a dot. That's not new. But what is going to be new is how we show up in it, how we kind of support the business as these new tools come out, not just for us, but for the business, and also kind of say to them, sometimes we can't just look at implementing and doing training and do all those things. We've also got to look at, have we built a culture that can actually continue to receive these changes? Have we built a culture that the fear of all these changes start to impact how people feel and how they show up? So again, people is always at the center of everything we do, but we almost have to think of that ecosystem. And so that, for me, is really the challenge that I see ahead for us. When I think about some of the other organizations I've had the pleasure to roll out things, I worked in a couple of more agencies, LCBO and OLG in the City of Toronto more recently. And one of the things we were doing when we were putting in systems is we were actually doing it to make life easier for the employee. But it actually had such a huge impact on some of the teams there, where I had to change roles, we had to change how we worked, and it really, the impact on the HR team as we support the people side of things was really quite huge. Now I'm saying it's not just that, but you now have to look wider than that and be able to flag those implications that it might have in other parts of the business, because it's already happening and we are seeing it. So, that's kind of like for us to kind of think about why it's important for us to kind of lead the way as we implement new systems. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to evolve, but we just want to be able to do it in a way where our eyes are open, right? We understand the full impact. So I think about, what makes a good experience for whether it's us as professionals or if it's, sorry, I just needed a bit, or whether it's the employees. And one of the things we do know is that people want things like intuitive. They want to be able to just quickly do it. Now, if, like me, you've got one of these, a smartphone of some sort, we know that everything's at our fingertips. And that's what our employees want as well. That's what we want. And I'm sure most of you, depending on how you traveled here today, might have even done some work on that on the train in if you traveled, right? And so our employees want to be able to have access to information quickly, and as do we. So we've got to also think about how intuitive it can be. Now, I'm not going to name the HRIS I have at TIFF, but let's just say it's not that intuitive, right? And so I'm always thinking about, and I'm not going to name it, but we always think about, I have to think about my team. How are they able to do their work? Hard, right? It's hard. But the reality is, if I had a choice, I would be looking at something that's easy, accessible. I think also with the evolution of other things around the information that's going in there, always having this eye on, is it biased? Is it non-biased? Like being careful about it, being very deliberate. So although technology is always going to be the enabler, we're the human side of it, right? So we have to make sure that everything's checked and thoroughly represents us as the organization moving forward. The other thing that's really coming through when I was thinking about, how do we make this, if this is the first interaction or is the first interaction for most of our employees, how do we make it personable? So we're starting to see the rise of it, almost like when you turn your phone on and it says, "Good morning, Marsha," right? How do you create that kind of environment for employees? Because we know we get more and more distant in terms of the work. Everyone's busy. We're all busy. But the point is, if that's going to be a first interaction, we want it to be more personable to that person. So I'm kind of like, in the back of my head, thinking, when I do get a few dollars and I am able to invest in a new system, one of the things I'll be looking for is how do you really create that experience from the first touch, from the first time you open or go onto that system to make it more personable. How do you layer in things around diversity? How does it know about me as the employee? Because let's just be honest, it's going to happen. Unfortunately, they're not going to get Marsha every time they pick up a phone or access to my team every time. But that shouldn't stop our teams being able to our employees accessing what the information they need. So our role is really to enhance that, to make it a more personal experience. And then the other thing, which is probably goes back to this thing around what I'm seeing in terms of fear around the increased use of technology in the workplace, is how can we be transparent, right? I suppose the one thing I would always say is, and my team know me, I probably over-communicate, but I'm very honest. Like I say, this is why we're doing it. There's always a why, and this is what we hope we achieve. But we also have to create what we call the employee voice. And so this is something I was reading a study that McLean's were doing, and they're talking about the employee experience, in particular the report, and some of the top 3 or 4 things that come up. And there's this rise of this employee voice. Now, why is that so important? Well, again, if we're kind of encouraging people to use information systems, technology, we also have to create feedback loops or an opportunity to hear why this may work and why it may not. And that actually will then contribute to this more transparent piece, which is feeding into this trust element. So I don't know if anyone's experiencing that. I certainly have. We certainly have in TIFF. We're quite a small organization. We're not huge. So our touch points are quite quick. But I've seen the erosion of, that trust bit. And a lot of it is because we're trying to push things out, not doing some of that employee feedback. So our employees have told us we want more communication in a way that around specific things. So although I think we may be over-communicated, it may not be in the way that they need. So now I have to listen to what's the employee voice. So that's the other thing that kind of goes hand in hand, and then that's why I don't think about technology in its own little world by itself. I look at it as an enabler, and it's an enabler to create an environment where employees can turn up, be their best self, feel that they're in a trusted organization where they can ask questions and also feedback if things aren't working. So how do we continue to build that? And that's more that culture piece as well. Nearly there. So some of the things that, for me, would be top of mind and things to think about is how do you build awareness around this? We're not going backwards, right? This is it. We're going to continue evolving. But how do we bring employees with us? How do we get them to be engaged in, the experience that we want them to have? The other area, which is really, and something, again, I can refer back to us at TIFF, is how do we foster this learning and adoption? And our host kind of mentioned it at the top when she talked about, the area that she works. But for me in particular, the fostering of learning and adoption is kind of like a mental state of mind. So we've been trying to invest some time in the growth mindset, making sure that people are open to trying things new, creating safe environments, so that, yes, sometimes things don't go right, sometimes mistake happens, but that's okay. And this all is kind of like, again, will help in terms of as you roll out, as you use tools to do our jobs from an HR perspective, but also for our employees to experience, that gives them that ability to feel that it's safe. So how do you continue to build that growth mindset culture? There's a book, I can't remember off the top of my hand, but there's a few good books in terms of implementing and thinking about that. Because as you create that culture and then you implement and you communicate, give an employee voice, you're almost making it, we're in this together, we're supporting you, but we also want to hear from you, and this is part of our evolution, because we're not going to go backwards, we're going to continue to evolve. And that feeds nicely for me into that establishing that trust and advocacy, because ultimately you want the employees to say, you know what, I like this and it's doing this, but it's not doing this for me. We're not going to be able to please everyone, but we're going to create an environment where it is normal to kind of give that feedback and be able to receive it as well, and to contribute to how we then evolve, whether it's the working ways, whether it's the culture, whether it's the other enablers in terms of that. But always thinking about people being at the center. So how do we do it? Again, this is not rocket science. Like, you lot could tell me the same thing. So one thing is we have to understand our employees. A lot of us use surveys. We've just conducted an employment engagement survey. In my past organizations where I've implemented new systems, I actually ask questions. We do like a little pulse survey. I always gather information. I'm like, okay, how do we make this feel like we're doing this in response to what an employee or teams need? So really asking and understanding what the business needs is always going to be important. That doesn't change. We already do that. But my challenge to all of us is how do we then use that information? How do we go back to it and say, these are some of the things you were saying, so this helps us to achieve that. The other one is around simplifying process. I've been talking about this a lot, and I've been talking about this in the lens, actually, from accessibility. So I oversee the diversity portfolio for TIFF as well, and last week I walked our new kind of floor plan for where we're going to have our market, and I was literally with a colleague who's a wheelchair user, and we were walking around and just seeing it through her lens, just hearing her talk about that. And I say that deliberately because I know the language simplified process and design feels like it doesn't include that, but it does. It includes everything. How do your employees experience the services that you deliver through technology? How are they experiencing it? We know that, a lot of things, if you're in a technical world, they talk about how many clicks to get to something. Like, I don't understand that. All I know is that by the second click, I need to get to where I need to go. But in reality, what they're saying is, how can we make this simple? Our jobs are busy already. Life's busy already. The last thing we want is to be able to have to navigate 3 or 4 pages or apps to get information that we need. So always having that front of mind is really good. And then this notion of continuous improvement and support, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking the last probably 2 rollouts that I did, 2 system rollouts, I used the agile approach. Again, some of you may be familiar with aspects of that, whether it's change management or whatever, but agile is really about saying, you know what, we're more or less there, 80% is good, we're going to roll it out. And if not, guess what? We're going to ask, did it work? Doesn't it work? Let's tweak it. and you keep going. And actually having that, and I use that as my basis for everything, has been really important because, again, in some of our work, we don't have that option. Like when it comes to some of our employee relations, we can't say 80% is good, right? We got to be fully in. But in this case, a lot of the time, what you want to do is you want to get it in the hands of the users, you want them to use it, you want them to give the feedback. So again, if we can do this kind of continuous improvement, again, this kind of that layer of the culture as you continue, the growth mindset is a really good way, a good lens to look through it. That kind of supports, the way and how employees will experience that. Again, always building this trust and this advocacy around how they should experience their employment with yourselves. So a couple of obvious things here, right? So we know that if we think about our employee life cycle, and it's so amazing how we always go back to this, whether you're 1 year in HR, 2 years, 20 years, 30 years, but the basics, this is the basics, that we do know there's points, definitely for us as HR, that there are going to be places where we will use technology and systems. I went to a really interesting seminar a couple of weeks ago, and I thought I knew everything about recruitment. Like, I was like, okay, we've seen all this before, but there's such good stuff out there. It's actually quite amazing. I mean, we do high volume for festival. We'll be taking probably 3 times as many people as we have all year round. But some of the technology and the systems out there are really good. Like in terms of, assessing, not just looking at resumes, but really deciphering, profiling, etc. There was even one tool that could almost say they've created their resume in AI. It was so funny, like the fact that they can now say, yeah, we think this is probably not a real resume, it's like AI. So there's so much out there. But also, we shouldn't think about some of the other areas where we can really support, where tools can support us and systems can support us, because it allows us, again, to kind of keep evolving and keep pouring into our employees in that way. For us, in terms of TIFF, we're not really, again, we're kind of mid-sized, so we don't use a lot of it. But for the areas, for the other organizations where I've rolled out, we've used quite a bit of this. I mentioned Workday in particular. I like that tool. There's some other ones out there, Dayforce, etc. And so we continuously are seeing how these are evolving over time. This is the last slide. So when we think about this, we already know, right? Okay, we're looking at how we work, what are the things that we do. And in particular, some of the key things we know is that, technology and tools can help us automate things, make things go faster, do the workflow. And I'm constantly looking at that. How can I ensure that we utilize or leverage what we have, but not losing sight of the employee, how they engage with that as well? And so for us, really, when we think about human-centric, whether it's AI or any technology, I go back to what I said at the beginning. We're in the people business. That's where we start. So for me, the enabler is always going to be the technology, but not losing sight of why we're doing it and how we do it. And in particular, to ensure that employees are with us on that journey is always going to be and has always been really critical to what we do. I'm going to pause there. We have maybe 2 minutes if people have comments or experience that they want to share, but hopefully something's resonated. Oh.
I just had a question about, you mentioned that TIFF's been investing quite a bit in nurturing a growth mindset amongst its employees. Mm-hmm. Can you share a few of the tangible ways in which you've been investing to create that growth mindset?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So part of our organization strategy, we have 3 pillars, and the third pillar is on performance. So 2 of the pillars are more about delivering the work, the market, which I mentioned, and some of our audience growth. And the third one's on performance. And performance is all about the how. So the fundamental piece about the how is that we had to start to encourage people to think differently because they've been used to working a certain way successfully for such a long time. So in order to do that, what we did is we took our leadership team away, last year, first of all, and did a whole masterclass of around growth mindset, which fundamentally is, looking, being open to have ideas, improving the way you think of like mistakes, like there are no mistakes, and creating that. So for me, it's top down. So we did that with our leadership team. Then we did that with our management team as well. And we actually used a case study. We brought somebody in from our industry who was able to talk to that. And we found that that really resonated with people because, we HR people, we can read a book and do that. But when you have someone come in and demonstrate it, and that really resonated. Now what we do is we use the interactions with whether our management and leaderships kind of push that in terms of how we have ideas. And now that we've just had the employee engagement survey, we'll be rolling something similar out to staff at the end of the year. So it's a continual process. It's not one and done, because now we have to build it into how we actually work and how we use that. And so one of the things I do is try to keep my peers accountable for that and say, are we thinking differently? Are we actually using some of this muscle that we've all signed up for? But yeah, so it's an ongoing. I'm glad at the start, and then we're going to be folding the staff in to get them to be involved and really call it out. We might not call it growth mindset, though, just to be honest. We may call it something else because, again, HR language, sometimes we kind of have to just leave that, but actually then be very, very bold in what the outcome is about. So yeah, so we'll be doing that. Well, thank you very much for your time.